But we have a scheduled interview which leads back to where we were in the first hour of the programme, and indeed earlier this week on at least two occasions, with Margaret Hodge, of course the Labour MP for Barking, but also, you may not be aware, the chair of the all-party parliamentary group on anti-corruption and responsible tax. Also, Margaret, a correspondent as long ago as last July with Nadhim Zahawi on issues of his tax arrangements. Two things occurred to me. The first is that he'd just become Chancellor of the Exchequer when you wrote to him. So I wonder if he still was when he actually received the letter, because the tenure was so short and the Royal Mail so unreliable. And the second point is, why were you sending this letter as long ago as last July, when many people have only woken up to this story in the last week?
Well, I sent it last July because he had just been appointed as Chancellor of the Exchequer, and I did email it. So I think there's just a chance that he got it before he lost the job. Why did I do it? Because there had been stories in the press about his tax affairs, and that had a number of implications. You can't have a Chancellor of the Exchequer. I mean, I would argue you can't have an MP, let alone a member of a government, who deliberately sets up contrived financial structures which appear to have no other purpose than to avoid tax. Now, I don't know if he did that, because he never replied to my letter when I asked him the questions in July. He did get sacked and everything changed. So I suppose I didn't chase for a reply. And then it emerged this week, with a leak. It was last Sunday in the Sun that he had paid a lot of tax. Let me just say one thing about that, James, is that when at that time in July, there was quite a lot of, noise in the system about whether or not he had deliberately avoided tax. And he put out a statement in which he said that, I'm going to quote, that his tax affairs were and are fully up to date and paid in the UK. Now, he said that right the way through until the story broke in the Sun last weekend. So either he told a mistruth. Yes. At that point, you couldn't have, if I can put it away, you couldn't on Saturday have paid all your tax affairs up to date, and on Sunday suddenly pay a great big sum in tax. And just if I may, one final thing. I represent Barking and Dagenham. If you take somebody on London living wage, living in Barking and Dagenham, they earn about 13,000 a year. Over a 40-year working life, they'll earn just over 900,000. We're talking about there was a think tank that looked at his tax affairs, and they're talking about just on capital gains. There are other taxes, but just on capital gains, probably when he sold his company, YouGov, he should have paid 3.7 million in tax. That is almost four times as much as my constituents earn in a lifetime. It's a shocker. You can't have an MP, a member of government, and certainly somebody who was Chancellor of the Exchequer with that sort of cloud over him without a proper explanation.
And the proper explanation is still not forthcoming. It occurs to me there is another possible version of events, which would be that he did honestly think that he was fully paid up, that all of his taxes had been paid. And to be perhaps a little cynical about it, that all of the devices that he had put in place had worked. And therefore it subsequently emerged that actually they hadn't, and he's in the hole for 3 or 4 million quid.
Well, I don't think, who knows, because he hasn't been transparent about it. But I don't think that what he did was necessarily unlawful.
No, I don't think anyone's suggesting it was.
No, what he did was use legal loopholes to avoid tax. And I always have this argument with tax professionals, because the whole of the tax system in the UK is so ruddy complex. It's created by tax professionals for tax professionals. So they find these loopholes in it. And I think it's not what Parliament intended. It's when we pass our laws, we didn't intend for there to be a structure whereby somebody making money in the UK from the work they do in the UK avoids paying tax in the UK because they set up an offshore company. So as a parliamentarian, I think if that happened, and we don't know yet because he hasn't come clean, if that happened, it's deeply immoral. It might be lawful, but it's deeply immoral to deliberately establish a structure with no other purpose than to avoid your contribution to the common purse for the common good.
Which takes us back to the somewhat unfashionable view, it didn't used to be unfashionable, that people in public office must hold themselves to a higher standard than the law itself, the law alone requires.
Well, absolutely. And also to the intent of, I mean, in this, I go back to this issue because they often, tax professionals say, well, it's up to you guys to sort out the law. But actually, this is a very technical issue. They write the law. It's the big four accountants who go into Treasury and help write the technical rules, and then they actually create the loopholes which people then use. So tax is not just a legal issue; it's a moral issue. We all part of the social contract in society. We agree to contribute to the common purse for the common good. And people like Zahawi make money out of a society that is at peace with itself because of that sort of social contract perspective that we have in the way that we choose to govern ourselves.
Finally, Margaret Hodge, the story, as you mentioned, appeared in a newspaper that I think is charitably describable as conservative adjacent. Some people suggest that probably wasn't an accident, a sort of planned leaking or a planned revelation. We don't know that, but the continuing refusal to answer questions by Nadhim Zahawi and his various spokespeople looks like a tactic. The gamble being that eventually the noise will die down and the story will go away. Is that a danger? Does that strike you as possible?
It did go away, didn't it?
Well, that's why I ask, you see.
Yeah. So thank you to you for raising it again today. So hopefully this will get a little bit of traction. I mean, there is another element to this, James. He had this, he ran YouGov very successfully, yes. And he's a brilliant, vaccinations minister. I mean, he was very good at that, at all those jobs. Going back, I sort of feel that he's got to hold himself to a high standard, but he has also got to be held to public. I know what I was going to say. It was this, that if he had an interest, he should declare it. We have a register of interests in Parliament. He's never declared any financial interest at all in YouGov, either in running it or indeed when it was sold in the capital gain that he got out of it, because of this complex structure that he's got. But again, for transparency's sake, I think we do have to hold ourselves to a higher standard. And should he have declared that in the Register of Interests? I think probably the answer is yes.
Well, we shall continue to watch this space. And there's 4 questions in your letter. We've only really touched on 2 of them, but we can return to them at a later date. Margaret Hodge, many thanks indeed, the MP, of course, for Barking and Dagenham, and also on the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Anti-Corruption and Responsible Tax.